Thank you guys. Thank you, Chris, for having me. Thank you to LMI, my boss, for sponsoring this so that we could be here today. And I'm very conscious of the fact that this is a lunchtime keynote, and therefore I'm your entertainment. So I thought story time might be fun. And I also thought space conference. What kind of story should I tell? So I thought ancient Greece. So that's where we're going to go. So Jason was born in a kingdom called Iolcus. His father was named Aeson. It's really startling to me that that name never caught on. And his uncle killed his father and took his father's throne. So we're basically in Hamlet, Greek Hamlet or Greek Lion King, like right now. And then Jason was prophesied to take the throne back. So Jason leaves, goes and is raised by a centaur, because this is Greece, and comes back and says, dude, I want my throne back. And his uncle says, cool, I will give up the throne if you go get the golden fleece, which, since that's like considered in that time a super impossible task, is essentially the ancient Iolcan way of saying on a cold day in hell. But Jason says, cool, I'll do that. That sounds like fun. And he goes to the best shipbuilder of the day, a guy named Argus. Argus says, okay, I'll build you a boat. So he builds him a 22-meter boat out of oak and pine. This is apparently important. I don't know why. But he builds him a boat out of oak and pine. And then Zeus, who is, for anybody who didn't take 7th grade mythology, Zeus is the head of the gods, gives him a piece of timber from the oracle at Dodona, which is going to tell the sailors, this is what lies ahead, and here are the choices that you need to make. Cool. So then Jason calls up 50 of his closest friends and says, let's go on a trip. And among these 50 closest friends are Orpheus, so they've got some tunes for the ride, and they got Hercules, so they've got some muscle when they run into trouble. Because of course they're going to run into trouble, right? This is a story. Among the things that they run into on their journey, you can see the harpies. That's fun. That kind of happens all the time. They run into a 6-armed monster. They got to fight this thing off. They have to pass between the crashing rocks, which Homer would later transform into Scylla and Charybdis and place in a totally different place for the Iliad. And they have to fight their way past these fire-breathing bulls and a dragon to get the golden fleece. Jason does all of these things. He gets help from the sorceress Princess Medea, and anybody who knows how that story ends, you know how this story is going to end. But they get the fleece. They go back to Iolcus, and Peleus, the uncle, is like, oh, I did not expect that. Did not see that one coming. And he says, so I really don't want to leave my throne. I kind of thought this wouldn't happen. So they killed him, because Game of Thrones is like definitely not new. They killed him, Jason takes the throne, and then everybody goes, isn't your wife kind of like a sorceress? We're not so cool with that. So they exile Jason. So Jason does take the throne back, but then he's exiled. Sad for Jason. But he does get the golden fleece. Many years later, after everybody that he knows and loves is killed tragically, because this is a Greek story, Jason sitting next to the dilapidated hull of his boat, which used to be the Great Argo, and now is just sort of a sad old boat. A rope snaps, a beam falls and hits him in the head, and he finally dies at the end of his tragic but very epic and heroic life. If you know anything about Greek mythology, you know that the exploits of all the other sailors on the Argo are chronicled throughout Greek mythology. Hercules, Orpheus, Castor and Pollux, tons of them. These guys were called the Argonauts. That comes up later. Okay, so that's basically Greece, and I thought that's a cool story. But I'm not from Greece, and I've never actually been to Greece. I kind of like to also tell a story a little closer to home. I happen to be from California. So I thought I'd talk about kind of the manifest destiny and how that worked out for California. It's actually kind of worked out. So in 1847, the Donner Party gets stuck. Anybody who's from this coast knows what I'm talking about. They get stuck in the Sierra Nevadas because they got a book by this guy named Hastings that said, I found this great new way to get to California. It's way easier. Hastings had never taken that route, ever. So 87 pioneers set off from Independence, Missouri, intending to make their fortune, get snowbound in the Sierra Nevadas over the winter. Many of them succumbed to starvation and illness, and the 46 who survived were kind of forced to become cannibals. They make it to Sutter's Mill. The story of what happened to them gets out. And then, kind of understandably, nobody wants to go to California anymore. Everybody's kind of like, And they look at their friend, and their friend's like, do not look at me, I am not a turkey. Like, nah, we're not going. So nobody wants to go to California. But then 9 months later, this dude named James Marshall is hanging out at Sutter's Mill by the river, by the creek, and he looks down, and he picks up this rock, and he goes, that's shiny. Ooh, that's gold, right? And the story gets out in days. It does not take any time whatsoever for the news to get out that there is gold in the American River in California, and it was discovered, ironically, at the very same place that was sheltering the poor Donner Party, the survivors anyway. So within a year, the non-indigenous population of California explodes from 10,000 to over 200,000. By 1850, California is the 31st state in the nation, and tons of fortunes were made here, okay? Levi Strauss, Johnny Wheelbarrow Studebaker, literally his nickname, Johnny Wheelbarrow. I cannot make this up. I really can't. And Manifest Destiny. We did it. We got all the way across the country, and we did it, and it's ours, and hey, we're rich. How cool. Okay, so let's move forward in history. That's kind of a fun story. It's the story of my home, where I'm from. And the story of why we're all here, right? The space race. That beautiful, amazing thing. We will do it because it's hard, right? We beat the Soviets to the moon. It's this amazing, massive achievement. And of course, I sort of expect that at this point, all of you guys know that that's not the whole story about the space race. And in fact, that's not the whole story about any of these things. So if you wanted to, and there are plenty of nerds in the world who've done this, you could trace Jason's quest. You can trace the Argonautica all around the Mediterranean and the Black Sea. And in fact, we know exactly where the crashing rocks were. They were at the Strait of Bosporus, because we know where Colchis was. It was in what is modern-day Georgia. All right? The crashing rocks, some people have said, might actually have been icebergs, because this was about 3,000 years ago, and we don't know, really. That might be a little bit far-fetched. But wait a minute. It can't possibly be true, right? 6-armed monsters. Those things don't exist. Yes, they do. Giant squid. Shows up in Melville, shows up all around the world, right? Ancient mariners didn't know what the heck they were looking at, and a giant squid is indeed a 6-armed monster when you're sitting on a boat and it's trying to eat you. But the most improbable part of this whole story is the Golden Fleece. Who the heck is going to sail all the way from Greece to Georgia, Georgia the country, not the state, to get a sheepskin made of gold? That does not exist. That is not real. Yeah, it is. Because the people of Georgia had alluvial gold deposits. So there was gold just hanging out in the sand, just like it was in California. And the people of that kingdom, they retrieved that gold using sheepskins. Oh yeah. So the tale of the Golden Fleece is not some mythological, ooh, this is cool. It's real. This dude went out looking for gold. He went out looking for a new way to get gold. He went out looking for a new way to establish trade routes. And my suspicion, and some historians agree, some don't, but my suspicion is that the piece of timber from the Oracle was in fact a major advancement in navigation that allowed them to get through the Strait of Bosporus. So we can't really necessarily say for sure that this is all what happened in ancient Greece, because we don't have written records from the time. Homer certainly treated it as though it was historical fact. And then he embellished on it and wrote the Odyssey and the Iliad and very shamelessly stole from that story. But we do know what happened in California, right? This is San Francisco. Between 1848, which is when that first engraving was taken, and 1850, the city exploded. They had tent cities popping up everywhere because they just couldn't keep up with building. Ships would come in and be abandoned so that people could go after this gold, because the crews were like, well, I'm not letting all of our passengers have the only crack at the gold. I want to crack at it too. So they were tearing apart ships to build the city, right? Oh yeah. And I'm willing to bet if you go to San Francisco today, you can find some of these old buildings that are still made with ship's timbers today, right? The gold rush isn't some mythological thing that people wandered around and picked themselves up by their bootstraps. It was a massive economic engine, and it changed the world. It also cost a lot. Prior to the gold rush, there were over 150,000 native people. After the gold rush, there were 16,000. Had a cost. But it did other things too. It really spurred the building of the Panama Canal. That had a cost that killed about 22,000 people from yellow fever and malaria. We didn't quite plan ahead for that. But we did build the Panama Canal, which was a massive, massive advancement in transportation and navigation. We got the Trans-Pacific Railroad. Massive, new, huge thing, right? Joint venture between capitalists and the government. Government put in about $1.5 billion in today's money, which is pretty good. It also, according to some historians, spurred the Civil War. Because all of a sudden there's this state that has a ton of money. And everybody wants to know, is it going to join the Union side and not have slaves? Is it going to be more of a Confederate state and have slaves? And so several leading historians say if the gold rush hadn't happened, the Civil War probably would have happened, but would have taken place decades later. Okay? I'm sure you guys all know this, and these are familiar things, right? Without the space race, we don't have Velcro, we don't have Teflon, we don't have Dippin' Dots. I'm from Santa Cruz, so Dippin' Dots, gotta have them, right? You don't necessarily have Star Trek, and you don't have Tang. Okay, seriously, nobody drinks Tang anymore, but you know, it was a thing for a while. So the space race did the same thing. All of these things are economic drivers. And what have we got going on today? We want to go to the moon. We want to do all of these amazing things, right? And we still have our mythology surrounding this. We still have this idea that Matt Damon is going to go up there and survive, right? The investment that we've put into saving Matt Damon in cinematography, by the way, is about $900 billion. So maybe he should not be the one to go. But these are all things that I think are really important. And the idea that mythology matters is really important, right? We have these aspirations. We want to go to the moon. We want to go do things because it's hard. If anybody remembers Star Trek and Picard climbing Half Dome, why are you climbing the mountain? Because it's there. It's part of the human condition, and these myths that we hold so dear tell us about who we are and who we aspire to be and who we want to be. But I think it's also really important to face the realities and understand that there are consequences to what we're doing, good and bad, right? I'm a big fan of Velcro. That's a great thing. But there's more that I think we can do. And I think it's really important to understand that we don't have to just accept that our actions have consequences, that we can actually take action to stop consequences that we don't want. And I also think it's really important to understand where we're coming from, right? This is a space industry. We want to go to space. We're coming from the planet, and we need the planet and we need humanity to work for us. Otherwise, we're not going to get anywhere. We're not going to have anything to come home to. And this is not a new concept, okay? This is Seattle, so Starbucks. I decided to bring in Starbucks, all right? So Starbucks really, really cares about coffee for some reason. I don't know why. Somebody can tell me later. But Starbucks wants to protect its coffee, right? This is not necessarily just we want to do good things for the planet. They want to protect what makes them who they are. They're a coffee company. If there's not sustainable coffee out in the world, they're going to run out and they will no longer be a coffee company. They will no longer be. So Starbucks has a lot of initiatives to, one, they're almost at 100% sustainably sourced coffee, but they also make sure that they give farmers support, farmers in other countries. And they've actually partnered with USAID to ensure that those countries have the access they need to the farming tools, techniques, tricks, water, and money that they need to survive. Coca-Cola is doing a similar thing. The number one thing, the way that Coca-Cola started was to make the concentrate, ship it out to people, and then people would add their own water, right? So water to Coca-Cola is literally how they make their money. And if there's no clean source of water, they're not making Coca-Cola anywhere, right? So Coca-Cola invests very heavily in clean water around the world. Yes, it's a little bit of charity. It's a little bit of, putting yourself out there and philanthropy, but it's also protecting your base and protecting what you're doing, right? Brooks Brothers does this too. And I bring in Brooks Brothers because you might recognize that symbol. That's the golden fleece, right? Brooks Brothers does do a lot of sustainable farming of sheep because they do wool, right? If you don't have fleece, you don't have fleece. But they also have the Golden Fleece Foundation. And the Golden Fleece Foundation actually looks at helping the American Red Cross and St. Jude's and several other healthcare companies and healthcare initiatives. And they do this because if people don't live, they don't wear Brooks Brothers, right? So what we do as an industry and what we think about what we do as an industry really matters because we can protect our industry long term, right? We can take care of our people. And so the point that I had in coming here was to talk to everybody about this and tell you a fun story, but also to remind you that whatever it is you do in the space industry, you depend on something. You depend on some resource, whether that resource is human capital, which we all depend on that, or whether that is a natural resource. And to remind you that if you take steps to protect it, you're probably going to be around a lot longer than if we don't.